to Critical Support, the news and views from two expert journalists. Myself, Shirin Sadeghi, or in Americese, Shireen Sadeghi. As you can tell from my name, I'm Iranian, and as you can tell from my accent, I'm American. And my co-host, Charles Davis.
I'm Charles Davis. I'm an American journalist based in Vienna, Austria, founder of the publication The Redoubt, and a contributor to The Guardian.
Welcome, folks, to another edition of Critical Support, where Charles Davis and I support each other and you as we try to make it through the chaos and the insanity of our times and try to find the good in it. Charles, today we have our first interview guest on Critical Support. Tell us who this amazing person is.
Yes, it is Professor Anna O. Law, who teaches at Brooklyn College, where she is the associate professor she's the Herbert Kurtz Chair in Constitutional Law and Civil Liberties. And she also has a new book out called Migration and the Origins of American Citizenship. Now, Anna and we spoke like 6 months ago, and a couple things have happened since then.
A couple.
One, her book came out in March from Oxford University Press. And two, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in the Birthright Citizenship case. So one thing Professor Law and I talked about before was the blessing and curse that her work is now so relevant. So Professor Law, I actually wanted to start with that because I know the way books work. I know you didn't start writing this because Donald Trump became president and started seriously questioning the definition of American citizenship. So I'm just curious, like, why? Why did you get into this whole question? Why did you find the question of American citizenship so interesting to begin with?
My goal was to write a book about migration and not get into citizenship. But as because citizenship is an enormously complicated thing, so I thought, okay, I'll just write a book about migration. But when I started writing that book 16 years ago, I quickly realized, oh, wow, okay, the question of citizenship is completely wrapped up in the right to mobility and the right to stay where you want. So I kind of had to go where the data sent me, and I couldn't just tackle migration. I had to tackle citizenship with it.
Well, Professor Law, why don't you tell us and our listeners what citizenship is?
Good question. Because citizenship is one of these things where everybody knows it's important, but defining it is like nailing Jell-O to a wall. I think that Hannah Arendt, a political theorist writing in the 20th century, who escaped from Nazi Germany, I think she has the most concise definition of citizenship, which is the right to have rights. But that only gets us so far, because when you look at the American history, before the Birthright Citizenship Amendment and before the Civil War, it was not clear, okay, so what is in the package of rights of citizenship? Yes, everyone knows the right to vote, jury duty, to run for public office, but what else is in there? And citizenship was underdefined in terms of its content and also underdefined for certain groups of people, like free Black people. Their citizenship was unclear.
Were there citizens in America? I mean, like, was George Washington a citizen?
Yeah, so once the Constitution was written, yes, there were such things as American citizens because the original Constitution said that you could naturalize. The birthright citizenship part doesn't come till much later, but there were U.S. citizens that could naturalize. And then there were state citizens. So you might be a citizen of, I live in New York, the state of New York. It's the other thing, though, it's not some states, some northeastern states treated free Black men as state citizens. But not all the states did that. And what is the relationship between US citizenship and state citizenship? Is one more important than the other? In the hierarchy, which one is more important? So all of those questions were undefined and underdefined until the Civil War.
Did citizenship matter as much then? Because, like, you look at the founding fathers and the talk of like all human beings are endowed with certain inalienable rights. But now, certainly, like our present government in the United States defines rights very much strictly on like whether you are a citizen or not. If you are a citizen, you are entitled to the constitutional protections that American citizens get. Otherwise, though, the Trump administration asserts they can basically do whatever to you if you do not have citizenship. Was it as important in a day-to-day practice as it is now?
It was and it wasn't. So if you, so the legal historians of the 19th century would say, okay, look, how you were treated, whether you were treated better or worse, was based on your sex, your race, your social class, and your membership in particular professions. So it wasn't legal citizenship that defined how you were treated. And the reason is there was no concept of individual rights back then. The concept of equal protection of the laws and of due process didn't exist until after the Reconstruction Amendments. So the thing that was prioritized was the public good. Well, that's mushy, but you can sort of infer that the public good meant the majority and what the majority and the people in power wanted. So if you were a marginal, unrepresented person like Black people, like poor people of any race, you had less good treatment and you had no presumption of complaining about it.
This is interesting because you mentioned the majority and the people in power in the same sentence, but there were a lot of colonies and states and sort of protectorates in the United States before the Civil War that did have a majority of Black people in them, or in some cases, a majority of Native Americans at one point. But they weren't the majority who were in power.
Right. Right. So African Americans, enslaved African Americans, constituted overwhelming majorities in many towns and cities in South Carolina while slavery was legal. Did they have any political rights even if they were free Black people? No, they did not. Native Americans lived right next to or with non-Native people, and they have a completely different relationship to the U.S. government than even enslaved people and white settlers. So, and they are Native people. It's that's a whole different piece that they have. Their rights are secured not as individual rights, but through treaties made with their tribal nations and the U.S. government.
Treaties that were often not abided by the
Treaties
US
that
government.
were frequently broken,
Right.
treaties that were that Native people were coerced into signing, into conceding their land. So yes, a long, ugly history of that.
So something that you mentioned in your book, I'm going to quote from your book. You said the unmistakable effects of slavery and Native American dispossession in modern U.S. immigration policy. This is what you're getting at. We're trying to understand now whether citizenship was a thing, if it mattered. You're saying it didn't until the Civil War, but for hundreds of years prior to the Civil War and the Reconstruction laws and policies that came into place after it, there were at least two, and also you mentioned a third, indentured white servants, groups of people who had no rights or didn't understand the concept of rights, and whose lack of those rights was implemented into U.S. citizenship and immigration law. Can you tell us more about that?
People often ask, so do you mean that there were second-class citizenships? I said, oh, definitely. So formal legal citizenship today, we can't understand. It's hard to understand. Well, if you have legal citizenship, you have this package of rights. But back then, it was more amorphous, and it didn't matter. I mean, so to make matters even more complicated, white women. There's no question white women are U.S. citizens or citizens of a state. Do they have political rights? No. Do they have economic rights? Limited. Yeah, the whole citizenship studies area is, there are so many facets and dimensions, but suffice it to say, before the Reconstruction Amendments created individual rights, it was if you were white and male, and not indentured, you I wouldn't say you would have more rights, but your life was less, there were less barriers and less forms of discrimination that you were facing than other people.
Why weren't white women doing anything about it? Did they know?
They were, and there are, I mean, you have Abigail Adams, who's telling her husband, think of the women, but the sense of, the modern sense of rights is, it's not what they thought of back then, and a lot of things are also handled outside of law. So it's handled through customs and through practices that are passed down for generations for me. So one of the things that legal historians caution us about looking at the early republic period is, don't go looking for laws and saying, oh, there are no laws about domestic violence, therefore it was totally okay. That's not how it was handled. It didn't mean you could assault your wife. It meant that it was handled through local channels, and more informal networks, and there are no actual laws on the books about it if you go looking for it.
So when you're conducting legal matters, essentially legal matters in a through tradition or custom, is that better or worse for the rights of these individuals?
I'm not sure I could say whether it's better for worse or worse. It's just that that's the way it was, and it was these norms of how to discipline and stop men from assaulting their wives or mistreating their servants. It's widely understood among the population what the procedures and the norms are. So it's not completely, it does exist, it's real, it's just not written into law. And I'm not sure that's better or worse than laws that are on the books and not applied evenly across groups of people. What is the point of a law on the books if you have no access to its protections because it's not enforced?
Right.
Exactly.
So I'm curious then, okay, one thing you talk about in the book is how the federal government did not have deportation authority, or at least it didn't have unchallenged authority to deport people it determined were non-citizens. And so I'm wondering if what then happened to people who were born in this kind of gray area, as you discussed. Like, for example, you quoting you here, you write that successfully entering the U.S. or being in the U.S. because one was born in its territory did not mean one also had the legal right to stay where they wished. So I'm curious, like, what does that mean? Because if the federal government did not have the ability to deport someone, was it left to like mobs of people that decided that wanted to force someone out of a territory?
It was left to the states, and the states often deputized the general public. So Kristen Obraso-Kofan's book about poor people, and she said, look, you don't often think of poor and vagrancy laws as migration laws, but they, in fact, those laws in the early republic and through the 19th century have the effect of determining where poor people can go and where they can stay. So the state of Massachusetts, for example, used to deport poor people, including some U.S. citizens, back to different states. They could deport people to New York. They could deport people to Ireland, to other parts of Europe, to Canada, basically it was at the discretion of the frontline local officials. They take a look at you and they say, Charles, yeah, Scotland. Yeah, okay. And off you went on the boat. So there's not a lot of due process. There was great discretion, and it was, as you can imagine, disproportionately enforced against if single woman pregnant, not traveling with anyone, holy smokes. And that is the poor laws and the vagrancy laws. It's all driven by the concept that there's no welfare state safety net programs. So every state and city doesn't want poor, disabled people who can't take care of themselves economically. And they don't want to be financially responsible for these people, so they deport them back to states or countries where they think they came from.
So this is actually basically touching on this concept you mentioned in your book called restrictionist strategies, if I'm not wrong, where if I quote again from your book, you say the strategies that were in place were, quote, not to prevent mass migration, but to attempt to socially engineer a specific population. And that's what I feel like you're talking about here. There's this concept right now that, oh my God, there's certain powerful billionaires and trillionaires trying to socially engineer the U.S. population. But according to your book, this has been going on for centuries.
This has been going on for a while. It was never, it's too good of a story. It's too good to be true.
Yeah.
Are we really to believe that, before the late 19th century, before the federal government started enforcing immigration laws, it was open borders? No,
right.
it was never that. There was always, from the people in power, from the lawmakers, from colonial legislatures to the early republic to the 19th century, there were always strong preferences for certain kinds of migrants and preferences for others that they didn't want to come.
So in some ways, I know we discussed this when we spoke before, Anna, but in some ways your history here is a little bit inconvenient, right? It's inconvenient to have a liberal narrative about the United States and arguments that I would like to have had with my family, which is along the lines of the ones that you're kind of rebutting here, which is that immigration laws did not just come around with the Chinese Exclusion Act, but they existed all along. So I'm just curious how you, as scholars and researchers and journalists, we of course want to pursue the truth wherever it leads us. But I'm curious how you respond, if at all, if this happens to you, like Trump administration or conservative figures who would like to cite this history to argue that the restrictions we're talking about today have strong historical grounding.
Okay, because of the Trump administration and his attack on documented and undocumented people, we are now we're oriented toward thinking of immigration law and policy as purely restrictionist. That is just wrong. Throughout U.S. history, and especially when you look at the colonial period, a strong migration policy allows the people to come in who need to come in for the sake of the U.S. economy, for our society, for enrichment of our culture, but it keeps out the people who don't want to come in, who may be harmful. The part of immigration policy right now that we have completely forgotten is the recruitment part, and the part about, U.S. tourism and foreign students at U.S. universities, those are multi-billion-dollar industries. Mm-hmm. That is immigration. The Toronto Blue Jays coming to play baseball, international opera singers, all of that is immigration. But now we just think about, it's all restrictionist. But if you look at the stretch of U.S. history, we don't have to go restrictionist all the time. What did the recruitment laws look like? How can we bring back some form of that instead of letting the Republican Party define immigration as purely restrictionist? We can't let go of the other part, of the incentivizing part. And we shouldn't lose sight of that.
I don't think that they are, though. Are they, Professor Law? The Republican Party has been pretty clear that they do want to brain drain China and India and other places and places in the Middle East and anywhere really where people who are useful to the United States should be incentivized and encouraged to come. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're right. They they want to. They've granted refugee status to white South Africans.
Yes.
So they definitely, like in the past, are very selective about. Oh, we don't. Well, we're not trying to ban all immigrants. There are good immigrants, as defined as white and European. But we have to challenge that narrative that you cannot. I mean, it's the jig is up at this point. You know, they've been so explicit about saying that there's a racial criteria for entry into the United States and citizenship. The administration is going after legal immigrants. Based on ideological grounds.
So this is interesting. This is really interesting because what you're saying is, and this comes back to a concept that you mentioned in your book as well, quote, pan-white identity that transcended social class. This is talking about if you're white, you're welcome in the United States, and
Right.
if I'm not wrong, you've always been welcome. Whereas if you're not white, we're going to brain drain you. We're going to take the top people from your country, the people that have potential and intelligence and skills, and we're going to suck them out of your country and use them. But maybe we don't really want them after we're done using them. Am I getting that right?
It seems to be that Trump does recognize that there are sectors of the economy, H-1B visas, for example, which usually go to high-tech workers, and the Silicon Valley relies on them. Higher education heavily relies on H-1Bs. Rural hospitals rely on H-1Bs for doctors, foreign doctors, and nurses. Trump seems to be saying, okay, yeah, we don't love non-white people, but if you serve some purpose for us, you can come. But don't think that you're going to get rights or citizenship out of it. I mean, I forgot. I don't know who the person who said it was, but somebody talking about 20th century German immigrations and guest workers and foreign guest workers said, we wanted workers, we got people instead.
Yeah, I think
They,
I
they,
think that was the
yeah, they just want people. They want workers to do the work. Their labor extraction, and they don't want to give these people any path to citizenship, or not even citizenship, but any basic rights.
So one way that a lot of non-white people are sort of bypassing that is through this birthright clause that exists in the U.S. law, which is that they're like, okay, fine, you're not going to give me anything, but I'm going to give my kid something. I'm going to have a kid in your country, in the United States, and they're going to get the rights that you denied to me. Why are we acting like this is why is Trump acting like this is a crime? Tell me about that.
The 1965 Immigration Act dramatically remade the demographics of legal immigration, of people coming here to stay long term, to get a green card, and to get citizenship. With the passage of the 1965 Act, which not coincidentally happened around the civil rights movement, the U.S. moves to a system of immigration selection that is national origins neutral. So what that act did is remake the demographics, the racial demographics of the immigration flow. Since legal immigration since 1965 has been mostly non-white, Trump is reacting to the demographic changes of that law. He thinks that by cutting off birthright citizenship, he will cut off the infusion of non-white people into the United States. But look, he's talking about birth tourism, that women who are heavily pregnant come here to give birth and they have a US citizen child. That whole thing is ridiculous. You can deal with birth tourism simply at the consular level, if you see a woman who's pregnant,
Yeah.
don't sign the visa. You don't have to then go torch the U.S. Constitution. This is, using an elephant gun to kill a mosquito, which betrays that this is maybe not about birth tourism, and this is about trying to turn back the demographic and racial clock to a pre-1965 era where it's mostly European immigrants that are arriving.
Is birth tourism, is that even, wanted to ask you about this before we even started, because I'm wondering if that is even a problem that we need to address at the consular level, because I think worst case scenario, you have a wealthy Chinese tourist, to use an example that Ezra Klein at the New York Times that talked about, I think last January, 2025. Worst case scenario, they come to Los Angeles and have a child and produce a future taxpayer that wants to contribute to American society. It's hard for me to accept that this is even a problem that we should be talking about, because it's not like people are coming here for America's generous social welfare, right? Like, they're not producing children that are going to live off the system or whatever, right-wing media wants to say. So it's like, so one, is birth tourism even a problem? But two, I'm also curious, like, related to that, whether that was considered a problem in decades past, or if this is like after the 14th Amendment was passed, whether there were concerns about such a phenomenon, or is this just a new thing?
No, this is a relatively new phenomenon. There is an industry of you can buy a package of, you have OBGYN support when you give birth and all of that, but it's overblown. I mean, from my standpoint, look, the Fox News is saying, oh my gosh, these foreign women are having children in the U.S. and then they can access the welfare system. How?
Which welfare system?
No non-citizen can tap the welfare system. Even green card holders are restricted from many federal and state welfare programs. And the idea that somebody is going to wait till this kid turns 21 to petition for their foreign parents. Wow, that's some, like, who makes a 21-year plan for their future?
And one day they will get $180 a month in food stamps.
If you look at the policies, it doesn't make sense, but it's a scare tactic. It's, oh my God, these floods of foreign women are having babies in the U.S. Oh, isn't that terrible? And no, they can't access the welfare system. What?
So here's a question I have. This pan-white identity that Donald Trump and a lot of people on various ends of the political spectrum, not just on the right end of it, are kind of grasping onto and promoting now, is why do they want that? Because the fact is that they do want people who already contribute, who, as you said, pay tax. And there's a lot of white people in America who are on welfare, who are not contributing in the way that Donald Trump would like them to contribute. And there's a lot of immigrants or non-white people who do.
He's trying to hold on to political power by weaponizing race. You're right that a lot of white people are not doing well economically, and they're not getting ahead. It's paycheck to paycheck if they have health insurance and all of that. But what he's giving them is racism, so that he can continue to win elections instead of them looking at corporate employers for exploiting them and paying terrible wages and not providing health care and other benefits. He's telling these people, your terrible condition and your economic struggles are because of those immigrants, those non-white immigrants. He stepped into a vacuum because Congress hasn't passed comprehensive immigration reform in so long that he's decided, oh, this is my golden ticket to weaponize the immigration issue.
What is
and
the
ride it to power.
What is the immigration reform that you think Congress needs to pass to sort of counteract this kind of behavior by the executive branch right now?
There needs to be, I actually have a piece coming out around July 4th with Liberal Currents. Liberal Currents asked me to write, okay, you know what, when there is a liberal government again in the United States, whenever that would be, what should the immigration reforms look like? And there are a bunch of reforms, but one major one should be, we need to take off the table. Okay, currently only US citizens cannot be deported by law. We need to expand that pool to say green card holders cannot be deported. We can say things like, it's not that there's no punishment if they violate US immigration law, but what about community service? What about having them pay a fine? Why is the punishment either deportation or you stay? It's too stark and too binary. What about a statute of limitations saying, okay, if you've been here for 10 years and you have no criminal record, we don't deport you. You may have community service or something like that if you violate immigration laws, but there's a statute of limitations about how you can get right under immigration law. That's a start. I mean, there are many more, but that's a start.
Are you more hopeful now than you were 6 months ago in respect to immigration and the prospects of a future liberal government? Because it seems like if you look at polling, Americans now say they love immigrants again. Great. Where were you in November 2024?
Yes.
And of course, there were the oral arguments at the Supreme Court that I opened with, where it seemed like most of the conservative justices, putting aside Alito and Thomas, you know, they're always going to side with the Trump administration. Most of the justices seem to think the administration's argument for overturning birthright citizenship were, quote, BS. So are you like more hopeful now? Like, is this the recent developments made you think that the tide will eventually turn and we'll get to have like a sensible, at least, immigration policy?
The eventual part of your statement is the part that concerns me. Yes, I see all the polling. I see that he's way underwater on immigration. But the problem is the Republican Party is furiously gerrymandering, furiously trying to control the result of the next midterm election, seizing ballots and redistricting and all of this stuff, helped by the Supreme Court. So I do know that the United States will turn again toward a more democratic government and a less restrictionist immigration policy. I don't know when that will happen. I hope it happens in my lifetime. I don't know that it will, but I hope it happens in my students' lifetime.
Has there ever been a moment in American history where that wasn't a problem, though? Going through your book now, I'm thinking, this is just the way it always is. It's up and down with immigration in the United States.
It is up and down. It's like a pendulum swinging toward restriction and then again toward a more open immigration system. But if we can stretch out the interval of the more open period, like post 1965 through 1990, where it was more open, if we can lengthen the next swing, that'd be helpful for the people who support immigration.
Right. and who knows, if they're in the majority or not?
Right.
That is the question. Professor Law, thank you so much for joining us today. This is the topic of our times, it feels like, at least at this moment. The open borders, the closed borders, the social engineering, the pan-white identity. Everyone, we recommend that you do get your hands on Professor Law's book and try to understand that everything that happens in the news today has a background in history. Thank you so much again, Professor Law, for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me on. This was great.
Critical Support is available on Apple and Spotify. And if you would like to support our work and help us expand our operations, you can find us at patreon.com/critical support. Paid subscribers get early access to all new episodes and interviews, as well as extended cuts of our previous shows. And if you have any feedback, topics we should discuss, or people we should speak to, you can contact us at criticalsupportpod@proton.me. That's criticalsupportpod@proton.me.
Critical Support Charles X. Shirin is a weekly 30-minute podcast of views, news, and interviews. Shirin Soderi is the co-host, co-producer, and sound engineer. Charles R. Davis is the co-host and co-producer. The theme music is the song Level Zero by the band Mon Plaisir from their album Turbo Rally Clicker 4000. Critical Support receives no corporate or institutional funding. We aim to be free to hold all to account.